I never thought a simple Saturday morning would turn into the kind of storm that would flip the entire neighborhood upside down. But life has a strange way of balancing the scales when arrogance collides with karma. My name is Daniel Harris, a 42-year-old contractor who worked his way up from almost nothing. I bought my home with calloused hands and years of saving, not by cutting corners, scamming clients, or living off inherited wealth. My home, standing in the heart of Oakwood Estates, represented more than bricks and wood. It was proof of my survival, my perseverance, and my refusal to bend under life's weight. Oakwood Estates was a pristine, gated community that looked picture-perfect from the outside. Manicured lawns, sparkling driveways, hedges trimmed like works of art. But behind that perfect facade simmered a darker truth. A homeowners association led by a woman whose iron grip squeezed every ounce of peace out of the residents. That woman was Patricia Monroe, the HOA President, a figure as polished as she was ruthless. She wore pearls to mow her lawn, carried herself as though she descended from royalty, and wielded the HOA rulebook like it was scripture carved into stone. My problems with Patricia didn't start overnight. They built over months, like pressure inside a boiler that everyone knew would eventually explode. She had fined me once because my truck, parked neatly in my own driveway, had a small patch of mud on its tires after a rainstorm. Another time, she slapped me with a violation because my grass had grown 1 inch higher than the arbitrary, acceptable limit. Every time her letters arrived, printed on crisp white paper with the HOA emblem embossed on top, I felt the rage building inside me. It wasn't just about rules. It was about control, about her need to dominate, to remind every homeowner that she was queen of this manicured castle. But what happened that Saturday went far beyond fines and threats. That morning, Patricia towed my car, yes, my car, from my own driveway. The story started like this. I woke up early, stretched, brewed myself a cup of coffee, and sat out on the porch with my golden retriever, Max. The sky was painted in soft streaks of orange and purple as the sun began to rise, and for once, I felt a flicker of peace. My work week had been brutal, with back-to-back projects, late nights, and clients who didn't know the difference between urgency and impatience. I deserved that morning, that silence. But as I sat there, sipping coffee, I heard the unmistakable rumble of a tow truck. At first, I thought maybe one of the neighbors was having car trouble. Then I heard chains clinking, metal scraping, and the heavy hiss of hydraulics. I looked down my driveway, and my heart nearly leapt out of my chest. My black Ford F-150 was being hoisted onto the back of a tow truck, like it was some abandoned wreck on the side of the highway. I bolted down the steps, still in my slippers, shouting at the driver, "Hey, that's my truck. What the hell do you think you're doing?" The driver, a burly man in a stained jumpsuit, didn't even flinch. He just gestured toward the clipboard on his seat. "Got an order from the HOA President. Says the vehicle's in violation. Non-compliance with community guidelines." His words hit me like a slap. Violation? It's parked in my own driveway. I barked, my voice carrying across the street. That was when I saw her, Patricia, standing at the edge of her manicured lawn with a smug smile painted on her lips. She wore a silk robe, her hair perfectly styled even that early in the morning, as though she had prepared for the spectacle. Her arms were crossed, and her eyes glinted with satisfaction. "You can't just do this." I roared, storming up the driveway toward her. "This is theft. This is my property, my home, my driveway." Patricia tilted her chin higher, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Mr. Harris, your vehicle has been parked in violation of community guidelines. Oversized trucks are not permitted to be left in driveways overnight. It obstructs the aesthetic standards we work so hard to maintain." I couldn't believe my ears. Aesthetic standards? It's a pickup truck, not a wrecked RV. And it's in my driveway, not the street. She didn't flinch, didn't care. She simply motioned toward the tow truck driver. "Proceed." Max barked furiously from the porch, sensing my anger, but I was powerless as I watched the truck that carried me through years of hard labor get hauled away like a criminal caught in the act. Neighbors began peeking out their blinds, some even stepping onto their porches. They didn't say a word. Some looked sympathetic, others amused, but none dared cross Patricia. She had fined them, too, bullied them, but she was still the HOA President, and they knew better than to challenge her. That silence burned deeper than her smirk. My blood boiled so hot, I thought I might explode right there in the middle of the street. I yelled at the tow driver again, demanding he put my truck down, threatening legal action, but he shook his head. Talk to your HOA. My orders are signed, and once it's hooked, it's going. He climbed back into the cab, and with one final hiss of hydraulics, my truck was gone. I stood there, fists clenched, chest heaving, as Patricia delivered her final dagger. Perhaps next time you'll remember that the rules apply to everyone, Mr. Harris. Good day. She turned, glided back into her marble-front mansion, and shut the door without another glance. I stood in the middle of my driveway, humiliated, furious, and helpless. But here's the thing about people like Patricia. They never realize how thin the ice beneath them really is. She thought she was untouchable, the queen of Oakwood Estates. But life doesn't let tyrants rule forever. Karma has a cruel, almost poetic sense of timing, and on that morning, it was already circling her like a hawk. Because less than 30 minutes after my truck disappeared, Patricia Monroe's mansion, her pride, her fortress, would be swarmed by men in black suits carrying foreclosure documents, and she learned that the empire she lorded over us was nothing but a fragile house of cards. I stood there, fists balled, staring at the empty driveway where my truck had been, my pulse still hammering from the confrontation. Max paced around me, tail stiff, ears perked, as though he expected me to charge into Patricia's mansion and drag her out by the pearls around her neck. I wanted to. Every muscle in me burned with the urge to storm her house, demand justice, make her feel humiliation she had just forced me through in front of the whole neighborhood. But something stopped me. Maybe it was a quiet whisper in my head telling me that people like Patricia eventually hang themselves with their own rope. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion of fighting with her month after month, violation after violation. Or maybe it was fate, because while I seated in my driveway, clutching my coffee mug so tightly I thought it might crack, I heard the low growl of engines, not the clunky rumble of a tow truck this time. This was different. It was precise, controlled, professional. Down the street came 3 black SUVs, glossy and menacing, the kind you only see in movies or outside courtrooms. Their windows were tinted, their movements synchronized, as if the drivers had rehearsed the approach. They didn't pull into driveways. They didn't stop for neighbors. They went straight for Patricia's mansion, their tires crunching against the smooth asphalt like hammers pounding nails into a coffin. I squinted, my rage momentarily dulled by curiosity. Max growled low, his hackles up, as the SUVs rolled to a stop in front of her palatial home. The doors opened in perfect unison, and out stepped 6 men and 1 woman, all dressed in dark suits, their faces carved with the kind of seriousness you can't fake. They weren't police officers. Their demeanor was colder, sharper, like they worked for a higher authority. They moved with purpose, pulling folders, clipboards, and a camera from their cases. One of them, tall with graying hair and an air of authority, led the group up Patricia's marble steps. By then, curious neighbors had begun trickling out of their homes. People whispered, pointed, recorded videos on their phones. The perfect silence Patricia always demanded in Oakwood Estates was now shattered by the buzz of gossip and speculation. And for once, all eyes weren't on me. They were on her. I crossed my arms, leaning against my porch column, the faintest smirk tugging at my lips. Well, Patricia, I muttered under my breath. Looks like the Queen's about to meet her reckoning. I didn't have to wait long. Patricia appeared at her front door, still in her silk robe, though now her face had lost that polished confidence. She looked confused, maybe even rattled, but she tried to compose herself, straightening her posture and fixing that same fake smile she always wore when delivering fines. The man with the gray hair spoke first, flashing a badge that gleamed under the morning sun. I couldn't hear his exact words from where I stood, but I caught fragments carried by the wind. Notice of foreclosure, federal repossession, immediate evacuation. The color drained from Patricia's face. She stammered, gesturing with frantic hands, shaking her head violently. "This must be a mistake," she cried, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "My husband and I, our finances are in perfect order. This is our property. You can't just—" But the agents didn't flinch. The woman stepped forward, handed Patricia a thick envelope, and pointed toward the driveway. The man with the gray hair waved at the others, who began snapping photos of the property, measuring, documenting. It was a spectacle, a takedown, public and precise, and every neighbor who had suffered under Patricia's reign drank it in like nectar. One of the agents motioned toward a waiting tow truck. Not the rusty one that had dragged away my truck, but a professional-grade vehicle that looked like it belonged to a government auction service. Within minutes, Patricia's prized white Mercedes, gleaming like a jewel in her driveway, was being winched onto the flatbed. The sight made my chest swell with satisfaction, so raw it bordered on joy. I whispered to Max, "She took my truck. Now they're taking hers. That's what balance looks like, buddy." Max wagged his tail, as though he understood every word. But it didn't stop at the car. The agents opened her garage, cataloging everything inside, boxes, tools, even her husband's motorcycle. Neighbors gasped, whispered, filmed. For years, Patricia had lorded her wealth over us, inviting board members to cocktail parties, flaunting renovations, showing off designer furniture through her wide glass windows. Now, those very possessions were being inventoried, tagged, marked for seizure. Patricia's screams grew louder, shriller, desperate. She shouted about lawyers, threatened to sue, even tried to block the agents at one point. But the tall man calmly handed her another paper, and with that, she froze, her body shaking as if the ground had just fallen from beneath her. I sipped the last of my now cold coffee, the bitterness perfectly matching the scene before me. For months, she had chipped away at me, stripping away dignity with each violation notice, each smug smile, each display of power. And yet here she was, exposed, powerless, her kingdom collapsing in front of the very people she had bullied. Karma wasn't just knocking at her door, it had kicked it down. The neighborhood transformed into a stage, and Patricia was the star of a downfall everyone had secretly wished for. Parents whispered to their kids, pointing at her with a kind of subtle schadenfreude that only comes when a tyrant finally stumbles. Some neighbors grinned openly, others recorded discreetly, but not one soul stepped forward to comfort her. Not one. She was alone, abandoned in her hour of humiliation, the same way she had abandoned us whenever we pleaded for leniency or understanding. As I watched, a thought struck me like lightning. This wasn't random. Foreclosures don't happen overnight, not to someone with Patricia's resources, or at least the resources she bragged about. This had been building quietly, while she paraded around pretending to be invincible. And if I knew Patricia, she'd done everything possible to hide it from us, even while her empire crumbled behind those marble walls. It made me wonder, what else had she been hiding? How many lies had she wrapped in pearls and silk robes while judging us for grass height and mailbox paint? I leaned on the porch rail, watching as the agents moved methodically, stripping away her illusions piece by piece. Patricia sank onto her front steps, face buried in her hands, her silk robe catching the wind like a torn flag. For a moment, I almost pitied her, but then I remembered the sting of that morning, the sight of my truck being hauled away while she smiled. No, I thought, she earned this, every second of it. And yet, deep down, a seed of curiosity grew. Why now? Why so suddenly? 30 minutes after she targeted me yet again. It felt too perfect, too poetic, as though fate had been watching, waiting for the exact moment to deliver its verdict. That seed of curiosity would soon grow into something far larger, because Patricia's downfall wasn't just about unpaid debts or a repossessed mansion. It was a thread leading to secrets darker than any of us had imagined. Secrets that would unravel not just her life, but the entire foundation of Oakwood Estates itself. The scene outside Patricia's mansion lingered in the air like the smell of smoke after a fire, even after the black SUVs departed. Leaving her property tagged and her Mercedes strapped down, the neighborhood didn't return to normal. People stood around in clumps, whispering and gesturing, like townsfolk who had just watched their tyrant topple from the throne. And at the center of it all sat Patricia, shoulders hunched, face pale, her silk robe now looking less regal and more like the costume of someone who had played queen for far too long. I should have walked back inside, should have shrugged, patted Max on the head, and told myself that karma had done the job for me. But I couldn't. Something in my gut kept pulling me toward the chaos, not out of pity, but out of a gnawing hunger for answers. I'd lived under Patricia's thumb for years, forced to endure her endless citations, fines, and arbitrary rules. Now that she'd been dethroned, I wanted to know why. I wanted to know what had cracked her fortress, what secrets had slipped through the marble walls of that mansion she flaunted like a crown jewel. So, instead of retreating, I walked down my driveway and across the street. My neighbors, surprised, parted slightly as I passed, their eyes wide with a mix of admiration and disbelief. They knew Patricia, and I had a history. They knew she had targeted me more than most. And now, as I approached her, I could almost feel their silent encouragement, as though they wanted to say the things they didn't dare. Patricia looked up when she saw my shadow fall over her steps. Her eyes were red, streaks of mascara cutting down her cheeks, her lips trembling as she tried to regain some shred of composure. "What do you want, Harris?" she spat, though her voice lacked its usual venom. It cracked, thin and brittle, like glass on the verge of shattering. I crossed my arms, studying her. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing this morning when you had my truck towed out my driveway. But I think I already know the answer now. You wanted control. The question is, Patricia, who had control over you?" Her jaw tightened, but her eyes darted away. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. That flicker of fear. That silent admission that she wasn't the master of her own downfall. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You spent years making the rest of us miserable. You fined us for grass, for fences, for parking. But you were sitting on a mountain of debt, while pretending to rule over us. Weren't you?" Her silence was answer enough. I almost turned away, satisfied with her broken expression. But before I could step back, she snapped, not with anger, but with desperation. "You don't understand, Harris," she hissed, gripping the edge of the step with trembling fingers. "This isn't just about money. You think this is some simple foreclosure? No, this goes deeper, much deeper." I frowned, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" She glanced around nervously, as if the manicured hedges might have ears. Her voice dropped lower, shaky but urgent. "There are people, investors, organizations. You wouldn't believe the kind of money flowing through this place. Oakwood Estates isn't just a neighborhood, Harris. It's a front, and I was part of it. For a second, I thought she'd lost her mind, that the stress had cracked her brain like an egg. But the way her eyes darted, the tremor in her voice, it wasn't the sound of someone lying. It was the sound of someone who had carried too much truth for too long. My gut twisted. A front? For what? She shook her head violently. "I can't. If I talk, if they know I said anything, I'll lose more than this house." She clutched her robe tight, her eyes glistening. "You think losing a car and a mansion is bad? That's nothing compared to what they'll take if they find out I open my mouth." I stared at her, my anger battling with curiosity. Patricia Monroe, the woman who had terrorized us with citations and smug smiles, was unraveling in front of me, not just from foreclosure, but from fear. For once, she wasn't predator. She was prey. And though I wanted to revel in her downfall, another part of me wanted answers. Answers I knew I wouldn't get standing out in the open with half the neighborhood eavesdropping. Before I could press her further, her husband's voice cut through the air. "Patricia, inside. Now." He appeared at the doorway, his face ashen, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair disheveled like he hadn't slept in days. He glared at me with eyes full of contempt. "Get off my property, Harris. This doesn't concern you." Patricia looked at me, her eyes wide, pleading in a way I'd never seen before. Then she turned and followed him inside without another word. The door slammed shut, leaving me standing on the steps with more questions than answers. I walked back across the street, my mind churning. A front? Investors? Organizations? What the hell was she talking about? Oakwood Estates was supposed to be a quiet, gated community. Lawns, pools, backyard barbecues. But the way she spoke, the fear in her voice, it suggested something much darker, something hidden beneath the surface. Back on my porch, I sat down heavily, Max resting his head on my lap, as if sensing the storm swirling inside me. Around me, neighbors still whispered, still speculated, but their voices faded into the background. My focus was fixed on that mansion across the street, on the secrets Patricia had let slip. She had built her reign on rules, but the foundation beneath her was rotten, and if what she hinted at was true, then Oakwood Estates wasn't just collapsing for her. It was a ticking time bomb for all of us. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the thought. I replayed her words, her expression, her fear. And as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the streetlights flickered on, one thing became clear. Patricia's downfall wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something far bigger, something I couldn't yet see but felt in my bones. And whether I liked it or not, I was already tangled in it. That night, Oakwood Estates felt different. Normally, After Patricia's infamous HOA patrols or board meetings, the neighborhood buzzed with low-key complaints whispered over fences or texted in private group chats. But this was something else entirely. The air itself seemed charged, as though the fall of our so-called queen had cracked the very shell of our pristine little world. Neighbors lingered outside longer than usual. Porches glowed with lights past midnight, and every conversation seemed to circle back to the same thing. Patricia's mansion being repossessed, her luxury car hauled away, and those mysterious agents combing through her belongings with precision that looked less like a routine foreclosure and more like a federal raid. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. My thoughts kept spiraling. Replaying her words, "This isn't just about money. Oakwood Estates is a front." The way she'd said it, trembling, desperate, like a woman dangling from a cliff, didn't leave my head. I had seen fear before. I'd been in situations where grown men broke down because life had chewed them up and spit them out. But Patricia's fear was different. It wasn't just about losing status or wealth. It was survival. And if she was telling the truth, then my home, our entire neighborhood, was sitting on something far more dangerous than bickering about lawn heights and mailbox colors. I rolled out of bed around 2 in the morning and found myself on the porch again. Max followed, his nails clicking softly against the wood. I sat with him in the darkness, listening to the faint hum of crickets and the distant bark of a dog a few streets over. The mansion across the way loomed like a wounded beast, its windows dark, its grandeur hollow. For the first time since I'd moved here, it didn't look intimidating. It looked vulnerable, almost sinister. I wasn't the only one awake. Lights flickered on in other houses. Curtains shifted. Silhouettes moved. Oakwood had turned into a neighborhood of insomniacs. Each of us trying to piece together the puzzle Patricia had dropped into our laps. I caught glimpses of neighbors who had always avoided confrontation, now whispering to each other in small circles, their voices low, their faces tight with suspicion. For years, Patricia had been the enemy, but now, with her throne shattered, we were left staring at the ruins of her rule and wondering what shadows had been hiding underneath. By morning, rumors had already spread like wildfire. Some said Patricia and her husband had been laundering money through HOA dues, funneling it into offshore accounts. Others whispered about drug cartels using Oakwood as a shell for moving cash under the radar. A more paranoid group claimed the entire community was built on top of illegal land deals connected to politicians and real estate tycoons. Normally, I would have laughed at such conspiracies, but after what I'd seen, the precision of those agents, Patricia's panic confession, I wasn't laughing anymore. I decided I needed answers. I couldn't keep sitting on my porch watching pieces fall without knowing where they landed. So I did what I always do when problem gnaws at me. I took action. After finishing my morning coffee, I walked to the HOA office, a smaller building tucked to the edge of Oakwood near the tennis courts. The office was locked, of course, but I knew Patricia often kept files there. I circled around back, checked the windows, and sure enough, one was cracked open just enough to slide upward. With a grunt, I hoisted myself inside. Max whined from outside, but I whispered for him to stay put. The office smelled like paper and dust, with that faint undertone of printer ink. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers labeled with neat tags, violations dues, board minutes. I started rifling through them, expecting to find the usual late payment notices, correspondence, budgets. And I did, but tucked among them were folders that made my skin crawl. Some were stamped with logos I didn't recognize. Finance firms, shell corporations, even foreign banks. The numbers didn't make sense. HOA dues were modest, a few $100 a month per household, but the documents suggested transactions in the hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions. I flipped through page after page, my stomach twisting tighter. This wasn't just bad bookkeeping. This was deliberate. Money was being funneled through Oakwood Estates, disguised as maintenance fees, fines, and community projects. Patricia wasn't just power hungry. She was a cog in something bigger, something designed to bleed people dry, while keeping up the facade of suburban perfection. One folder in particular froze me. It contained a list of residents, including me, with strange codes written next to each name. Some were marked with red stamps, others green, and a handful in black. My name was highlighted in yellow with the letters HD pending. I didn't know what it meant, but it made my blood run cold. I stuffed a few documents into my jacket, knowing I couldn't carry everything without drawing attention. Just as I slid the window shut behind me and rejoined Max, I caught sight of a black sedan parked 2 blocks down. Its engine idled, exhaust curling into morning air, but no one got out. I couldn't see who was inside, but I felt their eyes on me. I froze for a moment, my instincts screaming. Then, as if on cue, the sedan slowly rolled away, disappearing around the corner. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just Patricia's problem anymore. By snooping into her files, by pulling at the threads, I had stepped into something larger, something dangerous. And if Patricia was right, if powerful organizations were using Oakwood Estates as a front, then I was already on their radar. My truck being towed, her mansion being repossessed. Those were just surface-level moves in a game that stretched far beyond neighborhood politics. As I walked back home, clutching the documents inside my jacket, one thought consumed me. Patricia might have lost her crown, but the real rulers, the ones behind the curtain, were still out there. And now, they knew I was looking for them.